Welcome to Season 2 of the Pivot Point podcast. This season, we are featuring candid conversations. We're interviewing industry experts and leaders about candid conversations they've had that involve gender in some way. They're going to fill us in on what happened, what prevented them from addressing it, the risks they took in that conversation, why they chose to say something, and how they handled it, and what happened next. Stay tuned for Pivotal Stories, a Positive Change. In the studio, we have Danielle Vetter, and Danielle comes to us with a wealth of experience in her diversity work at Cummins. She currently, in her current role, coordinates implementation of the company's diversity and inclusion strategy. Diversity and inclusion is about recognizing and valuing differences and making use of those differences to deliver superior results. Her work focuses on data analysis, support of Cummins leadership, and managing Cummins' network of 100 plus global employee resource groups. In her previous role, Danielle managed $12 billion of charitable spending annually throughout the Cummins Foundation Community Development Grant Program, and she coordinated grant making in over 30 countries, including the regions of Europe, Latin America, China, and more. She has a master's in public affairs from the top-ranked School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University. And Danielle is passionate about data-driven programs that empower and strengthen communities. Previous work experience includes working for the national nonprofit Kaboom and the Indiana University Alumni Association. In our community, Danielle is very active with the United Way, Planned Parenthood, and Indie Hub. She also teaches yoga, and she loves music, travel, and enjoying the fantastic restaurants we have. Well, Danielle, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Julie. I'm really excited to be here today.
Well, as we do with all our guests for Season 2, we're asking about candid conversations you've had around gender and equality. And I understand many of these cross your desk on a daily basis. So I'm curious, which one did you choose to share with our listeners?
It's really interesting. When you first sent the prompt to me, I had a really hard time figuring out which story or conversation I wanted to highlight. Because you're absolutely right. I've been having these conversations on pretty much a daily basis. At Cummins, we set a goal of increasing the representation of women in leadership roles throughout the company, which is important for a number of reasons. It's important for having the creative problem-solving bench of women available to help address the critical business issues that Cummins needs to help be competitive for not just the next 5 years, but for the next 50 years. It's important to have different leadership styles to help recruit, attract, and retain top talent across the world. And when we announced these goals at our Global Women's Conference earlier in the year, we've had a lot of conversations since then with leaders at all levels of the organization, from the C-suite to the shop floor, about why having women in the organization is important. But for today, I wanted to talk about something that I experienced at the beginning of my career with Cummins and take a more personal approach with these conversations. And then I'd like to touch on how that ties into why, as a women leader, it's important to have these conversations regularly. Even though they are difficult, they're incredibly important for developing your own leadership capability, but also making others around you better leaders and more aware of how they can be inclusive in the results that they're driving, in the teams that they're leading, and in the projects that they're managing.
Awesome.
So I'll start with talking about a software implementation project team that I was on. There was a project leader who was a peer of mine responsible for managing the implementation of this global software that we were working on. As a leader, he had a few habits that were very frustrating to me and a couple other female members of the team. During meetings, he would consistently talk over women who raised their hand to spoke up and offer advice. And there were a couple of instances where he would have side meetings with the female members of the teams, take their input, take their ideas, but then present them back as ideas that he had come up with. This was personally frustrating because the project that we were working on was very critical and important for what we wanted to accomplish as a team. but it had created this really negative working environment that was very hard to overcome. So the difficult conversation came from the idea of, do we confront him and move forward, or do we kind of keep going with the status quo and regular stasis of what we had been doing? So I made the decision to have a one-on-one conversation with him after our team meetings to raise my concerns that we had with him. This was an intimidating concept for me. The idea of introducing conflict in the workplace is not something that I'm particularly fond of. And so we sat down over coffee and had a conversation about some of the things that I had noticed, particularly the way that he ran his meetings, talking over the female members of the team, and the moments where he had taken ideas from the female contributors and presented them as his own. The conversation ended up being a really productive one, not just for the project team, but also for my personal individual relationship with this colleague. It ended up being a larger misunderstanding. He was not aware of how he was conducting himself in the meeting. He was very focused on efficiency and driving towards meeting the deliverables and the outcomes. And when he was talking over, he first expressed his apologies to myself, and then he also reached out to the other female members of the team. And he added in what he called gut checks during each of the meetings, where he would pause and make sure that he allowed space and time for every member of the project team to contribute, to provide feedback, and to make sure that they had an opportunity to express everything that they wanted to. This change might seem like a small or a simple, insignificant story, but it was a really important moment for me, both as a leader and as a project team member, for a number of reasons. First of all, when it comes to leading, especially as a woman, having constructive conflict is not a bad thing. In fact, being sure that you have issues up front and everyone is working towards a common goal is one of the best ways to help make sure that you're engaging and leveraging every ounce of talent that you have around the table. It also allows you to focus more on the issues at hand rather than the person. Especially when you're thinking about gender diversity in your team. We approach leadership, we approach conflict, we approach problem solving in different ways. And that's a very, very good thing. So it was one of the first moments where I saw constructive conflict not be a detriment to a team, but be a really good asset to how we all worked together moving forward.
Mm. Oh my gosh, there's so many nuggets there for listeners to learn from. I love that. And how eloquent you are at putting that sequence of events together and what you learned from it. Because I do think, I mean, some of the research shows, and it's a generalization, but I find it to be true more so for females than males, is we're a little more conflict avoidant, right? We're a little bit more risk avoidant.
Absolutely.
And a lot of that's because of how we're socialized, not our natural makeup. But it can be constructive. And I think for women, flipping the script to, hey, engaging this conflict on the other side could end up being a really beneficial thing for our team. And like you said, it's an easy thing to overlook. And I think sometimes we make personal attacks like, well, he's just like that. Like he just doesn't care. He doesn't want to listen to anybody else's voice but his own. I've heard that a million times from women about their bosses or their peers that do some of the things that are very male behaviors, taking other people's ideas, talking over people, as you outlined in this example. However, addressing it in the moment, he was unaware. It was unintentional. And once he was educated, wow, what a beautiful change that came out of this experience. And you now have a colleague that even today you have a trusting relationship with, that if you had not had that candid conversation, you would not have as much trust.
Absolutely. And I think that key point, Julie, trust is something that cannot be understated, because trust goes hand in hand with authenticity. And authenticity is where you see female leaders really shine. When you come to the workplace as a female leader, I think sometimes there's pressure or a tension with leading as a female. There's pressured to kind of conform your leadership style or your personality, especially in fields like manufacturing or technology, to be more of a dominant or male energy type of leader. But that's not the most effective style of leadership for every person, that or gender, period. So if you can build trusting relationships with your colleagues, and if you can approach conflict from a point of authenticity, from a point of being comfortable and vulnerable with your own strengths and your own weaknesses, you can have these conversations with others where they're also sharing their strengths, their weaknesses. And it's a level of self-awareness that reduces tension and allows people, again, to focus not on interpersonal conflict, but on the task at hand.
Yep. Yeah, it's not the person, it's the behavior, it's the task, right? Mm-hmm. I think that also helps get over that mental roadblock. Well, Danielle, Cummins has an amazing story. So being in Southern Indiana, being in the technical and engineering fields, has every excuse to not focus on gender, to say, hey, we can't get enough women applying, we can't get women promoted. I hear that excuse a lot at other organizations, and I don't hear that at Cummins. Help our listeners understand, how did you get there? I mean, 33% at the VP level are female. That's unheard of in your industry. And how did you get there? What are you seeing as benefits of having more diversity at your C-suite and in other layers of your organization?
I think that's a really great question, Julie. Cummins has been around for 99 years. Next year is our 100-year anniversary. And our current operations are in over 190 countries. We have 60,000 employees that are working globally. And we are, you're right, in remote regions that are spread out all around the world. In advanced manufacturing, in STEM, and engineering, there is obstacles to getting women into our company, into leadership positions, into what we're doing. But Cummins has taken a proactive stance to elevate the careers of the amazing talent that we already have in the company, and also taking targeted recruiting approaches towards bringing in the best talent from around the world. One example I can give you is starting at the very top of our organization. Each member of the Cummins leadership team has a 5-year diversity and inclusion plan where they're looking at how can you help attract talent, how can you help develop the talent in the pipeline, and how can you help retain talent from a gender perspective over the next 5 years. So that means that I have 17 different officers thinking creatively about what diversity looks like in their organization.
Love that.
As a matter of fact, in the last year, we've managed to increase representation of women by 1 whole percentage point enterprise-wide, which is a pretty substantial move over just 1 calendar year. And having opportunities for everyone from the leadership level to be focusing on gender, and not just gender, but making Cummins a more inclusive place to work, making it a place where I can come into the office as a female leader, and that's an asset, not a detriment, is important. Particularly focusing on, you mentioned, our vice presidents or our C-suite having 33%. That's important from a career mapping perspective. Yep. That's important for someone at the beginning of their career to look up and say, here are these women that have achieved so much over the course of their career. Now I can see myself spending the next 30 to 40 years of my career solving problems, building new technology, innovating, and driving Cummins into the next century of cutting edge technology without having that leadership representation that looks like the rest of your workforce. It's really hard to get your talent to buy in and to stay engaged throughout the course of their career. Especially in technology and manufacturing, both in Indiana, but also globally, the talent for top competition is fierce. Yep. So Cummins needs to do absolutely everything in its power to develop programs, initiatives, and a workplace to keep these talented women in our company, because they are the leaders of not just today, but also tomorrow.
So many great pieces in there. And that 5-year diversity plan for everybody on your C-suite. Wow. And it's not just about recruiting, it's about retaining, it's about attracting. And like you said, the benefits are clear. I mean, the talent war is real. So diversity and having diverse people reflected in leadership to draw in diversity, but also to keep them, is how you differentiate yourself by looking at talent pipeline. So I really like that holistic view. And I know the conversation I had when I was on site doing our allies, Invite an Ally Day, which was a brilliant idea that your team had in your Women's Employee Resource Group. Mm-hmm. I remember one of the senior executives sharing, hey, we've been committed to this for the last decade. And yeah, it's the right thing to do. It's the right human thing to do. But the business case behind it, the reason why, is because we are focused on developing countries, right? Yep. We need to go to Africa. We need to be in India. We need to be in these communities. And guess what? Communities that thrive have women leaders, have women community leaders, because women teach and train others and build the community around them. And I just thought that was such a brilliant way to summarize the real why is, mm-hmm. It's an emotional component, but there's also a rational business case behind it, that they need to have women in their organization that reflect the communities they want to do business with. And that's such a noble purpose, and one that struck me as both mm-hmm. having that emotional but also business component to it.
That's another good point. And it's not just the focusing on the women that brings the business imperative to all of this work. Any change, any program, any initiative that makes the workplace better for women makes the workplace better, period.
Right.
Any change or adjustment that we make is not just helping women, it's making Cummins more inclusive. One example was this project that we ran out of India. We had a colleague who was pregnant who was working on the shop floor, and she was having a hard time bending over and moving one of our pieces from one side of the line to the other. So she worked with our ergonomics team to redesign the manufacturing line that she was working on. So the end result was not only faster, but it had decreased risks for the organizations. This means we were making product faster, we were doing it in a safer environment, and we had a new system that could be rolled out not just to that specific line, but to multiple lines throughout the plant. So that made it safer and a better place to work, not just for that woman, but for all of her colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great
one small example that you can find again and again and again, that it works not just for women, but for people with disabilities, for people with different countries of origins, for people that speak different languages. There's so many differentiating components that make us who we are, that are assets in the workplace. So the more we can talk about them and be open about them, the more we can design a workplace that helps to bring out and maximize the differences that we all bring to the workplace.
That is so beautiful, Danielle. Great example there. Tangible benefits associated with diversity, which is so important that people can connect the beliefs to the actions. Mm-hmm. So in wrapping up today, share with our listeners, how can they follow you? How can they follow the great work at Cummins?
Excellent. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Danielle Vetter. I'm also on Twitter at better_Vetter. If you want to follow Cummins, I encourage you to follow our social media accounts. Or on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you're interested in joining the Cummins team, we do have Cummins Careers either at a website or on social media channels as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on today. I loved your stories and real tangible advice for our listeners. In the studio, we have Peter Khoury. He is a certified professional NLP, neuro-linguistic programming coach, trainer, and strategic executive coach. He is a professional speaker and an expert in building public speaking confidence and skills in participants using the latest NLP, acting, and public speaking coaching. As a regular speaker and trainer with the California CPA Foundation, the Institute of Supply Chain Management, and National Association of Purchasing Managers, the Chartered Property and Casualty Underwriter Society, and the National Society of Professional Engineers, Peter specifically speaks on negotiation skills, persuasive presentations that sell, conflict management, and multi-generational communication skills. Lots of hot topics there. Peter uses his diverse knowledge of business, systems thinking, and coaching to bring out excellence in participate of his training speaking and coaching engagements. Before starting his own coaching and training career, Peter worked for 3 years as a pharmaceutical process engineer. His process engineering background helps him approach situations from a system perspective, giving him the ability to relate and communicate with people at many levels and backgrounds. He helps clients with management, leadership, self-empowerment, and strategic skills to achieve their goals. In addition to public speaking training, Peter is a regular speaker on the topics of negotiation, conflict, and leadership, and is the author of the book Self-Leadership Guide. Peter, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Excellent. Well, it is excellent to have you with us today. And as we do with all of our guests, we have you share a candid conversation. And actually, before we go into that, I thought I'd mention that one of our guests from the season actually introduced us. So we got the chance to meet through the podcast, which is always a fun, serendipitous thing to get to meet people that wouldn't have been in my orbit had Alia, I was featured on another episode, introduced us because when she heard the message and was we went through our candid conversation and said, hey, Peter is the guy you have to talk to. So I'm excited to have you, Peter.
Perfect. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, and we were talking about candid conversations and just with a lot of our guests kind of later into the season of recording, I've gotten the feedback, well, I don't have one. I don't think I've been in a situation like this. And then you were sharing, well, I've been privy to this happening. And so, Peter, share the situation you wanted to share with our listeners.
Yes, I'm like I think most people would say they don't have direct experience with this topic. However, I think, once they jog their memory, a lot of experiences will come to mind. In my case, I've witnessed a scenario at a Tony Robbins event, and I'm sure some of the listeners are familiar with this because it became a big media topic, where Tony Robbins, while conducting the seminar, he mentioned some comments, uneducated comments about the Me Too movement. And I was sitting in the stands, and all of a sudden this one brave woman gets up and she wanted to add to the conversation. And once she got the mic, she clarified the situation to Tony. She challenged him on his ideas. She did it in a very polite and professional way. I didn't feel like she attacked him in any way. And they had a very, very good and healthy dialogue. And I thought, wow, what an amazing woman to stand up in front of 10,000 people and took this stage to educate about women equality, not just in the workplace, but in society as a whole. And I thought I want to bring this as an example of the topic we're exploring today.
Ah, that's great. So what did she say exactly, Peter? Do you remember what made her argument so effective?
So she started out by saying, I love you, Tony, and I've been to all your workshops. However, I would like to challenge you on this topic. And I thought just the beginning of that is an amazing start because it wasn't an attack on Tony or his ideas. It was just an interruption of his way of thinking in a polite way. And she just wanted to bring up attention to this topic. And so that was a great start. And then she agreed with him. She said, yes, in some cases, because he was saying that it's counterproductive and some of it are lies. And she said, sure, maybe some of it are lies, but some of it is true. And that's what we need, why we need this conversation to bring this to light. And it's all about awareness. And I completely believe in that because I believe it's all about awareness. Because, men and women, we all have biases, and it's to our advantage, to our career advantage, to our life advantage to find out these biases so we can correct them. And if somebody brings it up in the conversation like she did, she brought in a lot of attention and a lot of awareness to the situation. And I acknowledge her for that.
Yeah. Well, I especially like the beginning too of building trust and rapport. Hey, I'm not here to, to um, attack you, right? And I think sometimes it can come across. I mean, I've seen it done in a way that does feel a lot more like an attack rather than a challenge. And so we've got to, especially as women, kind of toe this line of aggressiveness versus assertiveness, and what does that look like, and the perceptions around it. But saying, "I love you. I do want to challenge you on something." I would argue that probably is likely to be perceived to come from a good place, a good challenge that I can learn from. And so someone's not going to feel as defensive to that. So, and just to articulate and acknowledge his point of view, right, before sharing her own. And so, for our listeners that haven't watched Tony Robbins, it was spring of 2018. He had some kind of comments that he shared in one of his talks, and it had to do. I've watched it a few times. It's a little painful to watch, but at the same time, his whole business is built on non-victimization, own what happens to you and move forward. And so I get that's a part of his brand, and he kind of has this masculine energy, which we'll talk about a little bit more with Peter, since I know you do a lot of coaching and speaking training. But what I would argue from Tony's perspective, and the sentiment that I would share, is that, if we're waiting for men to get it 100% right, we're going to be waiting forever. So with Tony, he didn't say the perfect thing. He didn't even say really the right thing, but I think there was some acknowledgement on his end that he doesn't understand it, right? And he really wants people to persevere through this. So good intentions just didn't maybe come out exactly in an empathetic way. So probably learn, as we talk about a lot in our allies work, empathize first. That was probably what was missing in his message.
I think so. And I also, of course, I love Tony too, and I give him the benefit of the doubt. And I think most of the 10,000 people there gave him the benefit of the doubt because they know him, including that woman. And I think it's the way it was brought up. Maybe there's some unconscious bias, and when there is unconscious bias, usually the intention is good, but the person is unaware of what they're saying and how it's being perceived and the effects it has on people.
Excellent.
And I think by bringing the topic up, at least she put it up in front of him to see that there's a possibility of bias. And I think Tony grew out of this experience.
That's great. That's great. And I think what we're asking of our allies is, when you do get educated, and when a woman has the courage, like you said, in front of 10,000 people, I mean, in a regular situation, that's even nerve-wracking, take the courage to give you some feedback and to help you, as allies, be listening to that. Let that help you be better, right? Park those assumptions and those unconscious biases that might be driving some unfortunate behavior, and just acknowledge that we can all be better. We're never going to be perfect, and we're not asking you to be perfect, but we're asking you to be better and learn every day. So excellent points there, Peter. I couldn't agree more. Thinking back, moving over, transitioning to your business and what you do, and I know you do a lot of training and consulting and coaching with those that want to improve their presence, which is one of the number one things I hear from women in my development work is, I need to improve my presence or my confidence. I'm curious, what would you offer? I know you give kind of the same package of information to men and women, but what differences do you see, and what specific strategies, how would you tailor your message to meet men and women as far as public speaking goes?
We focus on effectiveness in the workplace. And when you look at effectiveness in communication at the workplace, there's a set of standards. Like, for example, you have to be clear, you have to be assertive, you have to engage the logic and the emotional side of people. And we give the same exact instructions to men and women because it's, at the end of the day, it's about leadership and not about being a man or a woman. So the instructions and directions are always the same. However, we see that the advice we give, when we give it to men, they take it and run with it. And when we give it to women, sometimes they take it and run with it. Sometimes we see some hesitation. And I feel like when we tell women to be assertive and to be clear and to be direct, the hesitation comes from maybe a time they were labeled as bossy, or they saw one of their female colleagues or women colleagues labeled as bossy. So they hesitate, and they're afraid to apply the techniques right away. So I think, in those cases, we take it one step further with our women clients, and we little by little show them the limits, and we do a lot of video feedback to show them that what they're saying, even though it's assertive, it doesn't mean it's aggressive. When you're being expressive, it doesn't mean that you're being masculine. I know you brought up Tony Robbins, and you say he has masculine energy. That's true. He has masculine energy, and he is expressive, and we can separate the two.
Sure.
Expressiveness and masculinity are two separate things, and that's some of the extra work we do with our women executives, just to show them the limits and the boundaries of their expressiveness, so they are effective, so they lead their teams, so they communicate their messages and influence.
Yeah, I like what you said there. It's the assertiveness, the directness, the clarity that matter no matter what, right? But when you put a male or female lens on it, it shows up differently in the feedback. Like you said, that women are more likely to get feedback based on their personality. She needs to tone it down. She's too aggressive. Yeah, she's bossy. This tend not to be words or attributes or feedback that we give men. But as you said, the male word for bossy, as you shared as we were prepping today, was bully. And I hadn't thought of that before, that there is a negative, if you can flip it. I would argue, though, I'm curious on your state on this one, but I would argue bully has a much more dangerous element to it. It's like, well, she's being bossy. Bully is like someone's going to get hurt if this doesn't stop.
That's absolutely, and that's something that we hear all the time when our women clients they say that, oh, men don't get labeled bossy, but some men, when they push the envelope, they can be labeled as bully. Like, speaking of that Tony Robbins experience, I was reading some news reports, and some people accuse him of being a bully.
Yeah.
Even in that setting.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, it's much more of a masculine label than a female label. And so it's just interesting. The words that we use matter. I mean, they really do, because you have this promising, executive that is a woman that and their company's investing and helping her be an even better public speaker. And then she's hesitant with the feedback she's getting because she's been told not to do that in the past. So we often send like this mixed message, and you talked about unconscious bias, Peter. There's an unconscious bias specifically in the book, What Works for Women at Work, called the gender tightrope. So we have to kind of, like, as women, it's like, don't be aggressive, and then don't be too meek. And so there's like this assertive line in the middle. And assertive tends to be okay, but it's just so razor thin that I have women thinking, like, am I being too assertive? And then there's this whole, like, they're constantly questioning themselves in the moment, which, for public speaking is not a good thing to have on your mind, self-doubt. So it's a vicious cycle.
Absolutely. And you said it like perfectly. The margin of error is smaller, unfortunately, for women than for men. The playground is bigger for the men because, in this side, you're not going to be labeled as weak. On this side, you're not going to be labeled as bossy. Versus for women, it's the rope, the area to play is smaller.
Yes.
But there is an area, and we have to acknowledge that there is an area, and it's about behavioral flexibility on one side when we're talking to women, and it's about understanding and learning and expanding the awareness on the men's side.
Yeah. That's so true. And I would argue enlisting them to be allies. If you see me, do this behavior, or, you have an opportunity to give me feedback, please, as an ally, I'm all ears. Help me. I'm coachable. And so it's knowing a recognition too of our allies that there is kind of that smaller degree of freedom for error. Like you said, that the marginal area is just a little tighter. And so it's funny, even today I saw a news report come out where the latest Fortune 500 list of CEOs. And, I keep getting people saying, well, things are getting better. It's again, 25, 500, so 5%. So we're actually sliding back a few decimal points. And it's like, geez, but I think it speaks to what you're saying in this conversation we're having. There's so few examples of executive female presence that we kind of apply the male standard to females. But then when women demonstrate themselves as males, we're like, ew, we don't like that. That's bossy. That's too aggressive. So it's like this back and forth.
Yeah. And it's important to look at women role models as leaders, not only for women, but also for men. Like, for example, I have an exercise that I've always done. I would draw like a circle in the center of a page. I would say that's me. Then I would say, who do I want to be like? And then I would draw rays out from that circle, and I would write down the names of people I want to be like. Like, for example, Tony Robbins is one of them. But I also have there Oprah Winfrey, for example. And I also have there Mel Robbins, Tony Robbins' ex-wife. When people open their minds and they start looking at the other side as allies, then the possibilities expand, and you start looking at role models from all sides.
That's so great, Peter. I like what you said, opening up and looking beyond your own boundaries for allies. And that's a great question to ask yourself. Who do I want to be like? I was just reading the book Quiet. Finally, I got a hold of it, discovered I'm an ambivert, but it's all about introverts. And she offers the questions very similar to yours. It's been really eye-opening for me is, who do I envy? And she answered, who do you want to be like? Who you envy? I mean, these are kind of similar questions. Write down all the people. Like, there's something going on there. Those are people that you admire for some reason, whether you want to be Tony Robbins, if he's on your list. That's, maybe that sounds pretty aligned with what you do and those are helping. But there might be others that personality or personal things might resonate. But it does give you a lot of clue, especially for our listeners that may be thinking about what's next for you or, making a change. That list, and I would argue diversifying your allies is a really great way to grow beyond your own boundaries. So it doesn't have to be race and gender. That can be a lot of different, diversity goes way beyond that. But thinking about how to diversify that so that you can get broader perspective.
100%. And looking at, like when you say, who do you envy and who do you like? If you even go one step further and go, what do I like about them? What do I envy about them? And bring it down to the behavioral level, then you remove the gender out of the equation. Like, for example, with Oprah Winfrey, I love how she connects with her audience. And I envy that about her, and I love that about her.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and those are specific attributes that you can either, continue to improve on or to seek out feedback on or coaching on, but those might be somewhat aspirational, but they also might be ones that resonate with you and who you are. Okay. Peter, this has been so fun to chat with you today. Thank you so much for your time. Let our listeners know, what's the best way to keep in touch with you? How can they follow you and learn more?
The best thing to do is to go on our website, magneticspeaking.com, and explore what we have to offer. We work with professionals from Bay Area companies like Facebook, Google, Samsung, you name it, and we help them improve their public speaking delivery skills, structure, and confidence. And it's the best thing to do is to sign up for a free course with us and just try us out, because we do things differently. We do it in a fun, interactive way. And it's good to try us out before you try a full day or coaching option.
I love that. So then get a taste of that and experience. And I agree, fun and interactive is the only way to go. But, as I'm learning about my more slightly introverted self, we've got to also think about different experiences for different people. So it sounds like if they can do something online, that might be appeals to a broader audience as well. But there's other ways you can work with, get more ingrained and interactive as well.
Absolutely. We do virtual coaching from all around the world.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, terrific purpose that you have. Thanks for sharing your candid conversation, your perspectives on gender and public speaking, and sharing some great questions that we'll include in our show notes for our listeners to follow along with Peter's website as well. Thank you for listening to the Pivot Point podcast and our candid conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to share it with a friend or subscribe to our channel. You can also follow us at Next Pivot Point on social media and check out our website for free, amazing resources to support your candid conversation journey. It's www.nextpivotpoint.com. Thank you.